Good evening and welcome to this edition of Dynamic CIO Breaking the Barrier Women in Tech. My name is Rahul Neelmani. I am the co-founder and editor of Greyhead Media, Dynamic CIO. I will be co-hosting this show with my colleague Smriti, who is the Director Community Engagement and Executive Editor with me. In fact, this is our 9th episode of Breaking the Barriers. Like any other industry, tech industry also has a huge gap to fill and a promise to keep, a long distance to cover as far as diversity and gender gap is concerned, especially on the top. This underrepresentation of women leaders not only needs a quick reversal, but also a dedicated effort and a mission mode. I mean, we need to get in a mission mode project to bring women to speed as far as leadership in technology is concerned. It's easier said than done, but it is also not impossible. There are women leaders and role models pushing the boundaries and finding a short way to rise onto the top. The year 2020 has turbocharged technology at least 3 years ahead of its time. New technologies have been implemented at a very brisk pace. What choice did we have? Well, that's how evolutions take place, and every evolution has evidenced influential and inspirational women standing shoulder to shoulder with men. At Dynamic CIO, we strike regular conversations with dynamic, affable, and enigmatic women in the corporate space with an aim to bring women on par and at the speed at which technology is growing. Leadership, technology trends, championing against the odds, product management skills, breaking into the C-suite, and a lot of other things is what we discuss with the women we get on board. Today, we have the privilege of having with us two very well-known, accomplished women leaders. Mahua Sen-Gupta, Managing Director, Mashreq Bank, and Mankiran Chauhan, Managing Director, India Subcontinent for SAP Concur, who will share their experiences, elaborate on the growth strategies, address the key concerns, and discuss their drive to success. Now, before we start our conversation with them, a few words about both of them. Mahua is a seasoned industry veteran with over 2 decades of diverse experience in the field of IT, banking, and financial services industry. Before joining in her current role, she has led leadership positions at 3i Infotech, ITC Infotech, iGate, Mphasis, and Accenture, where she created revenue drivers, built organizational competencies, and enhanced customer experience. On the other hand, Mankiran, who works as the Managing Director for SAP Concur, is responsible for providing strategic direction to the company's India business, as well as leading and providing guidance to sales, solution architecture, customer development, partner alliances, and marketing teams. Prior to joining SAP Concur, she was the Managing Vice President and Country Manager for India at Gartner. We are all familiar with Gartner. She has been awarded by the Economic Times as the top 20 corporate women leaders in India. So let's directly dive in. I've been eagerly waiting for this occasion. Let's dive into the questions directly, and I will ask one singular question to both of you, Mahua and Mankiran. You can reply one by one in the same order. So in short, tell us about your journey to success. What has been the driving force or forces that worked to get you where you are today?
Okay. So honestly, Rahul, I don't think that I can call myself as that successful, but whatever that is, having said that, I would say my only driving force has been, I'm not somebody who has made long-term career plans when I was young, not one of them. I have always just tried to do my best in whatever I was doing. For example, when I was in school, I had to excel in school. I had to go to the best college. That was as much as I would see. very short, very myopic. But I think that's exactly, and even now, I don't make career plans which is 10 years ahead. I look for whichever role I'm doing, I want to do it the best. And I've seen that it has paid off for me. And the other thing that I do whenever I'm planning, I don't really plan, is that I get bored easy. So no two roles that I've done are similar. So what it has done as a result, it has given me a very well-rounded career. So when I talk to somebody, I've done sales, I've done pre-sales, I've done delivery, I've done pretty much all of it, operations. So I think it is more by accident, but not a very long-term career plan. So those are the two things that has brought me where I am. So that's about it.
Great, very, very subtle, but a very exciting journey that you have had. And you said that no two similar roles and no long-term career planning. I mean, that's also a recipe to success, I guess, and more so in current times. Mankiran.
Rahul, one of my guiding principles really has been that people matter, but the ones who matter, your family, your loved ones, often really don't care about what your gain, what your materialistic status is, your gains are, your titles are, what role you do. And the ones who really care about just those things don't really matter in life, right? So I think that for me has been my driving force. And if you think about the sense of purpose that is deeply rooted for me, is really in ensuring that people who are important to me, therefore, are proud of me, and know that regardless of whether what I'm doing and what's going on in life, I'm always someone they can count on, whether that is as a daughter, a wife, a mother, a sister, leader, coach. For me, that has been the essence of where my drive comes from. I'll give you an example. As a 23-year-old, first time living in Mumbai alone, I purchased a car, cash down from from the bonuses I achieved.
Okay.
For me, it was about making my life simpler and the commute simpler. But for my parents, it was about the pride. It was the level of independence that it demonstrated I had reached, and they bragged about it to everybody who would listen. Right. And if I talk about my journey, I'm an army brat, born, raised in transport. So lots of steady transfers every 2-3 years meant lots of changes, lots of varied exposure. Something as simple as sports or extracurricular really changed as well. Where athletics or badminton in one city or school, and then there was an emphasis on public speaking in another one. I joined NCC cadet as in another one. So I've been very fortunate with the experiences the upbringing is provided. And that followed a bachelor's in computer science, business management, that really just got me into technology industry, more by chance than I think by a planned move, like Mahua said as well.
Yeah, so people play a central role. There's something about, someone coming from an army background. I mean, they are brimming with a very different level of confidence. And sorry, Mahua, I'm not suggesting that those who don't come from army background don't have the confidence. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, over to you, Smriti.
Thank you, Rahul. So I'm talking to one scuba diving enthusiastic and one theater enthusiastic. And the question that I want to ask you is, women in tech is not a big issue as women leadership in tech is. And we see currently less than 1/3 women in leadership roles. So how did you get into the technology sector? Did you face many challenges? How did you prepare yourself to moving up? Mankiran, we'll go with you first.
Sorry, did you?
Mahua first, let Mahua.
We are reversing the order.
Okay, please, Mankiran, go ahead. I could not hear. Go ahead, Mankiran.
Smriti, I think that's a really good question. Growing up, I've had the advantage of, I think, the upbringing, the parents who held the children, my brother and my sister and me with the same standards. I think that really allowed me the opportunity to really dabble with many things. I learned coding, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I think half of it was because the NIT centers were air conditioned compared to the college campus. Or my Bachelor of Science, where was a focus of computer science and statistics. It was a subject, statistics as a subject was something I didn't even know existed, but really laid the foundation now that I think about for my logical thinking. My first job after MBA was unintentionally in a technology sales role. And that was followed by 15 years at Gartner and then now at SAP Concur. So over the course of my career, I've stayed closely linked to technology. And the two things that really excite me about technology is how it impacts different aspects of lives and the speed at which it's accelerating the pace of change. Just a simple example of my own personal buying behavior of using digital wallets or digital money at the beginning of the pandemic to what I use today, and how forever that behavior has changed, right? I'll never be able to go back into carrying a wallet with lots of money, lots of credit cards and going to market. I probably, my behavior has changed for the future, right? And if you talk about moving up, which is how did I prepare myself to move up? I think the beauty is that now when I'm sitting here, I'm looking back, it's very easy to connect the dots, but to be very candid, my first career promotion that I was offered, I actually declined because it came at a very ill personal time. I was about to get married and I was mentally preparing for that change, for the life change that was going to happen. So I turned it down, but it was the belief and the nudges from so many other people that made me take that first step. And I'm grateful for that belief in me, the mentorship, the support, the colleagues who pushed me, the whole ecosystem that rallied to take that step. And the lesson I learned from that was that the opportunities are never presenting themselves at the perfect time. You have to take the chance when that opportunity comes. And that's been a reoccurring theme for me, with all the changes that I've had to go through.
Truly very inspirational. And the way you spoke about the support of the ecosystem, be it family, as you said earlier, also be it your colleagues, your mentors, it truly works in a leadership role, is what I believe truly. Mahua, over to you.
So me too, technology completely by accident. I never studied a line of coding. I am a pure finance, business, accounting person, economics and accounting person. But only thing, as Mankiran said, I mean, my upbringing, my parents brought me and my brother exactly the same way. I never felt that there is something that I can do. And then fortunately, I chose the right guy. So I got all the support. See, the main reason women stay away from technology is because of the varied commitments, the timing, the long hours, the travel, etc. So what you need most for that is somebody to be your strong backbone behind you. And that was always there. Ecosystem absolutely helped me so much because, as I said, I was a pure business finance person, joined Royal Bank of Canada very early. And I joined a group where one side was finance and the other side was technology. And I gradually got pulled towards technology. And I have to say that my bosses, my colleagues there, everybody supported me in that. Thereafter, I don't know how I became a completely a technology person. I came back to India, joined the tech industry, and that's it. And that's who I am. But never, as I said, never have been trained in technology. I just made to believe my upbringing made me believe that I can do everything. So I guess that's how.
Okay, let me break the monotony and go a little out of syllabus. I hope it is not taken otherwise, but two things that I want to ask both of you, especially starting with you, Mahua. Between finance and technology, what is more fascinating?
See, for me, from a fascination, passion perspective, it's always finance. But what I've seen is in today's world, technology drives everything. See, even for a bank, many of the banks openly say that we are more a fintech than a bank. BBVA, for example, the bank I come from, Mashreq, we are extremely focused on innovation. Yep. Our CTO comes from Google, and not from a banking background. So I think today's world is such that though I'm personally much more fascinated by finance, I think that even finance cannot move today without the backing of technology. So it has become the backbone for everything.
Great. So Mankiran, question for you is different. Two questions, woven into one. You worked for Gartner, and it was very obvious that, Gartner actually is the gospel truth when it comes to technology decision-making for any user of technology. So how did you make this switch from an analyst agency to a hardcore leadership role? And the secondary question, I mean, supplementary question to that is, how does it feel to be a leader, at such a young age?
I don't feel young anymore. I have to say.
Don't say that.
I think I've spent majority of my career at Gartner. I will forever remain indebted to the opportunities that were presented, regardless of the age. It was the most the company that focused on result-oriented leadership opportunities versus age-oriented opportunities. I became a manager at 26, right? So I got opportunities regardless of age, and I think that is kudos to the company that looked at that, that had that mindset to foster it. So for Gartner, it wasn't really about whether you were an analyst, whether you were a salesperson, whether you were X or whether you were Y, who was the right person for that job. And I think that's just the culture of that organization. And I'm hoping that has become a part of what my leadership style is. And regardless of whether you're 60, whether you're 20, I've been very fortunate. And I think the leaders today are extremely fortunate to have that generational diversity we get to work with. That I've had people on my team with both age spectrums, and it's never been about the age that's afforded it.
Yeah, so we will take a break from our questions. I had requested people to indulge in asking questions. So I have a question for you, Mankiran, from Ragini. She says, what is the one golden rule of being a tech professional that the aspirational Mankirans should live by?
Okay. I would say, okay, for a tech professional and aspirational. So I've always looked at the fact that I am where I am because I'm very authentic. I've never pretended to be someone else. I'm always looking for learning opportunities. There was this saying that one of my early mentors said, when you're green, you grow. When you're ripe, you rot, right? And I think I've seen people in the 20s that are ripe. I've seen people in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s that are green, right? So I think for me, that combination of that attitude to look at learning something every day, something small, something really small. It could be very small. When I made the switch to join Concur, I was asked, do you want a Mac or do you want a Windows? I'd always use a Windows. And I said, I want a Mac, right? Something so simple, but that mindset to say, hey, I'm going to try something new, but I'm not afraid to fail because that's who I am, right? So I think being authentic combined with that mindset to constantly learn and evolve would be my recipe. And I hope there'll be more Raginis and not more Mankirans, because I think that's what authenticity will mean.
Absolutely, I agree. And Maua, to your comment, there's a compliment coming from Sushanto Banerjee. I completely agree that finance and technology today are inseparable. We are now back on the order. Smriti, you can go on.
Thank you so much, Rahul. So, going on of what Ragini asked, number of Mankirans, then there'll be a number of Mauas. So when you talk about this, how do you create a strong personal brand, and self-promotion, which basically is very necessary in a leadership role? Maua, we'll go with you now.
Okay. So again, see, as I've said before also, I have never strived for what I want to achieve. Similarly, I've never strived for how to build a personal brand. It is, I think, if you're authentic in what you do, your personal brand gets built. But I do agree that we need to be focused on it. It's not that shying away from it is not an option anymore. I mean, maybe it was okay in the past generation. Right now, it is not. So all I can say is for my personal brand, I have, again, as I said, I have focused on whatever I did the best. And be it doing my desk job or be it going out and doing something voluntary, Whatever I did, that's my focus. And I think that has given me my personal brand. People recognize me as somebody who, if I sign up for something, I'll give my best. And then I have some passion which also helped me build my personal brand. For example, I have always loved to write. You know that probably from my past, Smriti, that I write a lot of articles. And when you write, you want others to read it, right? And the easiest way is to publish. I mean, now it is probably easy. It was not easy once upon a time, but that is something which actually helps build your personal brand. And I realize that how good it is as a brand building, mechanism, because people see you as a subject matter expert. And when I started writing, I didn't really start that way with that goal that I want to establish myself as an SME. I just wrote because I loved writing articles and business articles. So I did that. Similarly, I have some emerging tech areas which are my passion. For example, blockchain. Now I end up going to multiple events to talk about it, all by accident, purely because I liked something and I stuck to it. I focused on it. I wanted to be the best, and the rest followed. So, but I never shied away from it. That no, I don't want to go for that. That I didn't do. That's all I would say that I did from building my personal brand.
I had the pleasure to listen to you at 2-3 events where we met. So yes, I can resonate. Mankiran, over to you about, how do you build your personal brand?
I have to say, I wish I was gifted like Mawa is. I wish I could write. For me, I think the brand, Mawa, everything that Mawa said, right? To create a strong brand, it has to be a reflection of who you are. And I now call it the authentic, being authentic. I didn't call it that when I started. For me, that's about saying and doing things you actually believe in. So often one of the best compliments I've ever received was that there is only one version of you. It was said, I think, in a jest, but for me, what that meant was that I'm not perfect, but I'm not trying to be who I think others want me to be. And that for me has laid the foundation of how I think about personal branding. I don't want people to think I'm the perfect version of perfect leader, perfect X, perfect Y. Wife, mother, whatever category you want me to put it in, but it is who I am, and I'm happy to be, true to that. So, as an example, for me, inclusion is a big part of my personal brand, and it started because that was a cause that deeply resonated with me. Growing up as a woman in sales, woman in technology sales, you're always I was often the only one in the room, the only woman in sales, the only woman manager, the only woman this X, Y, Z. I'm sure Mama can resonate with me. So it started by ensuring that when I had the chance, there were more women in sales hired. There were more women in leadership focus. There were, when I was returning back from my first pregnancy, that was the first person to have come back to work from a pregnancy break. How did I make sure that there were others who felt comfortable to bring in their authentic self once they were at that position? I'm now associated with this NGO, which is called Latika Roy Foundation, which focuses on creating a better world for children with disabilities. And that for me is an extension of that inclusion. It started with gender, as a gender diversity, more returning mothers, more women in sales, but it has widened that focus in my personal brand for inclusion. So exactly what Mawa said, when you believe in something, when you're passionate about something, it shows, right? So you don't have to pretend to have that as a part of your brand. That just becomes a part of your brand.
Absolutely. And, certain things that both of you have said with a great deal of simplicity have deep connotations, and, they go beyond the realm of professional lives that you have been conducting very successfully, I must say so. So these are the nuggets of inspiration that we want all our listeners, the budding leaders, to take as a takeaway from conversations like these. Questions coming in. So question coming in from Arshad Usman. He has kept it very open-ended. Question to the participants, you can answer one by one. What is your current ideal work-life balance? A little cliched, however, the extension of that is a little hilarious. How do you handle Zoom fatigue? A new term the current new normal. I mean, let's lighten the atmosphere a little bit.
Go ahead, Mankiran.
Balance, I think, is not something you ever find. It's something you create, right? It's for me, it's a constant. There's never, I can never say, okay, now today was the perfect work-life balance day. Rahul, you've seen me sitting in my laptop in the
Absolutely.
park. For me,
Absolutely.
though, on that particular day, that was balance. On a different day, my husband and I are constantly syncing our calendars for something as small as making sure which, this past Saturday we had a parent-teacher meeting, same time, 2 children. So it was just about syncing up which one's turning up for which meeting, right? Or every week, which one is responsible for overseeing which child's homework, to make sure it's submitted. So balance is about finding things that are important to you and finding the space for that. I always think of it as building blocks. If I want to get my 10,000 steps, then I have to make time for it and create that opportunity for me to go create those 10,000 steps, right? And do X and do Y and do Z. So it is something that you create constantly. I don't find personally on the Zoom, Zoom fatigue. For those who know me, I'm constantly on camera. I'm an extrovert. I get energy from people. So the fatigue, the Zoom fatigue hasn't set in yet. I'd love to meet people in person, but I'm very happy to stay engaged online as well.
Oh,
Okay. So for me, it's exactly when Mankiran, you were saying, I was laughing because it is ditto. I mean, for me and my husband, but for me, the balance is every day there is to be a phone call. There is a phone call that, okay, even when our daughter was very small, now she is a teenager, every day is planning. Who's picking her up? Whose office will she go to from the daycare? If we both have long time meetings, late night meetings, if I have a late night out of office meeting, which I cannot take on the phone, then he has to stay back at home that day. If I'm traveling at a certain time, you cannot travel that time. So it has always been that way. And we have had many fun incidents where we exchanged her at the airport. We have taken her along in our travels between the two of us, typically more him than me. But we've done all kinds of such balancing, and it has been, there have been days when it is like, oh, you have to just barely manage, but it is so much fun. I mean, the only thing we never complained, because when we decided to go for a 2-career life, we knew that some of this will happen, especially after we had the little one. And we took it in our stride. When we sit back now and discuss this and tell these stories to our friends, I mean, we just get a very good laugh out of it. So balancing, I think we just did it. And I always say that it would have been much more difficult for me to balance if I didn't have him. So I can't just say that enough.
Okay, there are more questions coming in, and I personally want to pause our questions, because the idea of this whole conversation was to have interaction with the people who are joining us for the show. So Bhuvaneshwari wants to know, how should women encourage themselves to come out of their comfort zones and seek jobs to work in out of their normalcy? I hope I'm able to kind of communicate the question well.
Okay.
Who wants to take the Mawa, you want to take it?
Sure. See, one thing, as I say, I mean, there is nothing, only thing I would suggest that everybody believes, including you, Bhuvaneshwari, is that I can do it. If you want to do something, you can do it. How you would make it happen? Because it will not be the comfort zone that it is when we are sitting at home. It is, of course, much more comfortable when you are at home, things are under control. But the fact that you are asking this means that you're not really in your comfort zone. You want to come out, right? So just do that. If you can, if you want to do it, just think about this, keep this belief that if you want it enough, you will find time, you will find way to do it, and everything else will fall in place. That's all I would say. We all balance in our own way. Everybody's style is different. Everybody's situation is different, but it happens. If you want it enough, it will happen. So just please go for it. That's it. Take that leap.
Mankiran?
No, I said it really well, so I'm not going to add to it. Just said it very well.
Great. So before I take the other question, I have a very, this is a question hidden in my mind for a long time. We have always been told by our family members or by our children that don't get work home. You already spend a lot of time at work, and you're already stressed. And when you are coming home, please don't get the work back. Right now, we are working from home. So do you ever confront that situation that enough is enough? Can we just shut the computer off and go for a drive, or just disconnect and do something that is not related to work? I mean, I'm asking in the realm of a leader. I mean, you cannot afford to switch yourself off.
I would argue, Rahul, I think on the contrary, the pandemic, being home, has allowed us to experience the balance, or experience moments. I wouldn't say balance, I've experienced moments that I never got a chance to do. As someone who's constantly traveled in all my career, I've always been out of home. 2-3 nights, I consider it as a number of nights, because those are the nights you tuck the children. 2-3 nights a week have always been my yardstick of travel. But the first year, 365 days, I've been at home, right?
Right.
Now that's a moment that I would have never had the opportunity to be present for, if not because of the pandemic. I think, we put something on our calendars as a 1 to 2 lunch, sacrosanct lunch break. And there was a day, I remember, it was winters, the weather was beautiful. We had something very light for lunch, and 1:20 I was done. And, I had that remaining 40 minutes, and my son said, "Mama, do you want to play badminton?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So we took our rackets and went out and, took that moment, you take the chance, right? You get a moment, you take it, because I know that's not a moment I would have ever had if I was sitting at work morning to evening. So on the contrary, I think the pandemic has allowed us to switch off and be present for something, and then go switch back if we need to. It has also meant that I work 2 days, 2 days a week after the kids have gone to bed from 9 to 12, of course, but it has allowed you to give flexibility of how you want to get the job done versus being visible while you're getting the job done. So
it's a lot about mindset as well. I mean, you need to switch off at the spur of the moment, and when you find the occasion, most certainly. Mahua, any comments on that?
So same with me, I would say, but unlike Mankiran, my daughter is a teenager. So the demand on mom's time is becoming lesser and lesser. It's actually more Netflix is more preferred to mom. but the point is, see, I have always done it. When she was little, once I picked her up from the daycare, between the two of us, whoever. So from say 7 to 8:30, by the time she would go to bed, that time I would rarely take calls. And it was a very public information that I've made that, okay, unless it's a client call, which is absolutely important, then I would join. Otherwise, mostly our calls are internal, various different things. If it is that way, that can wait. But I made myself available. Say after she hit bed around 8:39, I would connect back in, and on everyday basis. From then on till whatever time required. So I have, it didn't really need the pandemic for me, but at the time of the pandemic, I would say one thing, as Mankiran said, see, having that lunch with the kid on a weekday, to me, that's a big prize that this pandemic has given me. I haven't been able to take a long lunch break because of the style of working, the counterparts that are, that is really early morning for, not early, but mid-morning, which is when UAE is very active.
Right.
So I must say that I take very short lunches, but at least we eat lunch together. So, but for the pandemic, that wouldn't have happened.
Another question before I hand over to Smriti, question by Sushanto Banerjee. So his question is, are there really any gender-specific barriers in the world of technology today? If so, what would they be? What are they be? Mankiran, you can go.
I'm going to be biased and say that, of course, there are no limits, right? Of course, there are no limits. There are only limits as far as we want to create them. I talk about AI and think about the biases that are seeping into AI and the implications of that in the long run, given, so I think those are some longer term problem statements to consider, which I know the world of technology is already taking. But I don't believe, I mean, I'm sure Mahua and I are biased to believe that there is no glass ceiling. There's this quote on my LinkedIn that says, that don't tell me the sky is the limit, because there are footsteps on the moon, right? And I think that's the mindset that applies in the world of technology as well.
Agreed, completely.
Smriti, you can go on now.
I already spoke about, and I have been connected with Mahua closely more than Mankiran, so I know her passion is theatre, same with Mankiran for scuba, and those are the two passion or hobbies, as I call. Unfortunately, we can't pursue in the pandemic. But I wanted to know, as a leader, how do you spend your time when you aren't working? What passion, vacation? Unfortunately, vacation is also not possible. But yeah, what are your passion? What are your hobbies? And how important are they helping you shape up as a leader?
Okay, so I'll go. This is something, it's very close to my heart. So theater is something I started much later in my career life, as you know. I think I started somewhere around 2009. Again, my husband pulled me into it because he has been he has been into theater for a long time. I wasn't. I got kind of tricked into doing a short play, and then I just got hooked. After that, in 2014, we started our co-founded ventures, which is our theater platform. And see, what theater has taught me is, of course, theater is the biggest, one of the biggest casualties of this pandemic is theater or any kind of performing art. But what theater has taught me are multiple. Very commonly people would say that theater, if you practice theater, your stage fright is gone, you become a better speaker. All of that is okay. But what it really does are two things. What it has really done for me: one, see, when we are in our offices, in our office position, the chair gives you a lot of respect. The chair gives you an ability to influence people. In theater, when I'm in the theater rehearsal floor, everybody is equal. Ours is amateur group theater, right? So we don't pay for our theater. We don't pay the actors or anything. So we are all in it together, and together we create something which so far I'm very proud to say that all our plays have been very well accepted. Most of our shows are fully sold out. But the thing is, in order to get there, you have to manage everything by influence. Nobody is sitting on a chair of power. In today's matrixed world, where how many people do we directly manage? It is all about influence. Success of an individual or success of your group, everything depends on how much you can influence your stakeholders. I think theater is a fantastic trainer for that. For me, at least, I would say it has trained me how to influence people without having a position of power. That's the first thing. Second thing it has done is, as I said, theater is very poor. So we do everything ourselves, between me and my husband, right from sales to marketing to stage designing, production, everything is ours. It actually makes you a good entrepreneur. You do end to end, you do it in a very tight budget, and you aspire to do the best. You want people to really appreciate what you're doing. So I think these are the two main things that theater has given me. And I'm really grateful. And I don't think I'm going to give up theater anytime. Even if I'm doing a grandmother's role, I'm going to keep doing it. And my passion, as you said, you asked the other question that you had, Smriti. If I'm not working, typically I try to spend time with the family. Theater takes away a lot of my time because weekends are all for theater. So outside of that, I paint a little. I do a little bit of gardening, but it's only, very little whenever I have time. That's it.
Mankiran, about you.
I'll have to make sure, once this is over, the pandemic is over, to come and see that.
Absolutely.
Theater.
Thank you.
I'd love what you just said, and you're, very inspiring. Smriti, for me, for me, it's not one passion. I always think of myself as a sum of many parts. In the roles I do as a mother, daughter, wife, etc. In the hobbies that I have, I love reading. But I'm also, very open-minded about trying new things. And I think that wide range of experiences, you said scuba diving, I'm a certified scuba diving, I love sky jumping, I love exploring new places or learning a new skill or traveling to a new place or trying painting in the pandemic or gardening. I've planted all the flowers recently. I'm always willing to give everything a try, and I think for me that's that just is a sum of my many parts. Since you said scuba diving, I'll pick a rule from scuba diving that talks about how that has shaped me as a better leader. One of the first rules of scuba diving when you're going for the certification is that says you have to be present now, like in the now, right? You have to be fully present when you're diving. When you dive, you need to be in that moment. You need to be aware of your surroundings. You have to keep the person that your buddy inside. You have to be aware of what depth you're at, how you're breathing, because that's what controls your ascent and descent finally. But you also have to be fully present in order to appreciate and enjoy that experience, right? Because what's the point of diving if you're going to be worried about everything else, but you're not going to enjoy that underwater splendor, the marvel, the colors, that you get to see. So, I think the same is my rule for leadership with whatever I do, right? When I made the choice to do it, it'll be with my full commitment, my full energy, my full passion, and ultimately me being fully present, whether it's this conversation or whether it's, what I do or whether it's, whatever it is that I choose to do at work or as a leader, it'll always have my, always have my full energy.
I mean, great. In both examples, when Mahua told about theater and how she with her husband is almost running the show. I mean, it also tells a very sorry state of affairs for a nation like us, that theater is not considered to be a great art, and therefore people do not flock too much into theaters. However, the dedication in both, whether it is theater or it is scuba diving, being present in that moment, and both of them require courage. I mean, one is underwater. The hydrophobia can kill millions of people. On the other side, stage fright is something which is ingrained in us until we train ourselves. I have been victim of both, to be very honest. I've been hydrophobic. I've had trauma going onto stage, although my profession is such that now I have to be on the stage quite often. However, another question coming in from my own colleague, Bablu. He wants to know which is the one area where you generally see women lagging behind. Now, Bablu, you are inviting bashing, but I would still ask this question to both our guests.
Okay, so I think I'm going to take a pass at that, Mahua, and feel free to add on it. I would say that lots of times I see the reluctance of women putting their hand up for the next thing, right? So I would think, I don't know if it's self-confidence or belief or whatever limitations in our own mind. I think that is an area that I find a lot of people. And if you think about the technology industry per se, Rahul, attrition rate in the tech industry is very high for women in the first 10 years, and that's the time which also coincides in the prime motherhood years. So when people join back, there is often that perception that they're going to be less committed or ambitious, or even women themselves are saying, what, I have this massive responsibility, and therefore I'm not going to opt for those meaty, more demanding roles, right? Or how will I do this? I've had so many discussions with so many people who are not even, you're just getting married, but who are having conversations about how they will ever balance. The hesitation, I think, is in our mind. So I would put that as an area that we're probably lagging, because I think, we wait for someone to nudge, we wait for something to happen, a trigger to happen, versus going for it with all our, with all the confidence, with all that power of why we entered the workforce in the first place. Mahua?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when you say you almost, I mean, when you started speaking, I thought I'm talking. It's absolutely that. Most of the time, we don't raise our hands. We don't go for that meaty role, and most of the time, we do it at a time when it is not needed. So when you are having a child, when you have a little baby with you, at that point, if you're not taking it, I can still understand. But as Mankiran said, most of the time, it's much ahead, and we are apprehensive. So I think there is some place where our, in general, I won't say for everyone, but in general, the confidence level is lower. And secondly, we always feel that I won't be able to. There is this social pressure. I don't, honestly, I feel it is not society, it's us. We feel the social pressure because we feel that, okay, this is expected of us. At some point, we need to get out of it and do what we want to do. Who cares what society thinks? Once you're successful, everything falls in place. Everybody supports you at that point. So.
You are absolutely right, and I can't agree more. So much so that there are stark differences within very dogmatic societies. For example, a place like Haryana, where I live and Mankiran lives. There are honor killings happening on one side, but there are families which are promoting their female children to go and compete. And what you see in Olympics right now is a huge representation of women from a dogmatic society like Haryana. I mean, and what else will they become but role models when they excel in their career? So the shift is taking place. However, my observation and my question to both of you is that there is still a huge gap. I mean, whatever we say to pacify ourselves and to be content with, but there are stereotypes which are there in the society. There are there are gaps which exist. Is this because of lack of role models? Is this because of lack of confidence? What is the core reason that not more females, not more women actually aspire to brave it and be on the top?
It's the same as we were just talking about. See, it's more about, I think, yes, there is some social pressure, and it varies from, say, area to area. Also, there are some, say, where I come from, say, Calcutta has had very little when we were growing up, because it started probably gotten, I mean, even our, say, my grandmother's from the grandmother's generation, women started getting educated. My mom was a professor, but even then, so there are some variation. So there could be some social pressure. I think mostly it is us. I mean, who will break this for us? No one from outside will come and break it. It's only us who will have to break it. We will have to decide that, no, we can see, and it is with everybody. I have to be honest, when I had my daughter, I had this role model of a mother who was a professor herself, who quit her job when she had us. And I loved the fact that I would come back home to see my mom open the door and greet me. So when I was having my daughter, I always had this pressure. While I loved my career and I wanted to make it, I always had this pressure at the back of my mind that my daughter will not get that. But I knew that I will be an unhappy mother if I don't pursue my career. So the fact is, at some point, we have to stop thinking about what others feel and push for what we want. And as more and more women start doing it, and we are seeing a huge improvement, right? Generation after generation, it's improving substantially. And there is no dearth of role models now. I mean, there are so many. So it is not a dearth of role models. It's more, each one of us have to feel that we need to do it. And that's how it will happen. Mankiran, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. I think role models, yes, there is, this massive change, Rahul, generation to generation, and there's so many more that we see today. I think of it like any game. Olympics is a season, but if you want to win a game, you have to stay invested in it, right? You have to be in the game to win it. You can't win a race you're not a part of. And I think, going back to the conversation about whether roles don't come in or whether women don't choose to lean in, I think That's a very important cycle, that vicious cycle of us making choices for women, saying, oh, she's just returning from a maternity, she'll not be able to take a traveling job. Oh, she's got a small child, she can't do late hours. Or I am just, new mother, or I've just come back into workforce and I can't do this. So that vicious cycle, I think, definitely has to break. I'll give you an example. I was coming back, returning to work after my first child, and I didn't know that I was going to be offered a massive career break, a massive career growth opportunity, at that time. And that mail from my global head still remains in my, I still remember it. And it said something like, we trust you and we think you're ready for this role, but I'm asking you to think before you respond. We won't hold a grudge if you choose not to take this job, and because you've got a lot on your plate. But remember that if you do choose to take it, it'll be very hard work, but we will do everything in our parts to make you successful, right? And that belief was empowering. And I think that is what we owe the generation of workforce, men and women both, that belief, that we have their back and we'll manage. And their, if it's coaching opportunity to say, you've got a different, it's something happening in your life that needs a different opportunity or a different discussion. I know I speak to people who are sending call, who have empty nesters, whose kids have suddenly grown up and they're dealing with life without children. There's people who are starting the career. There are people who are planning retirement. The pandemic is really brought that life conversation to the forefront for people, right? So there is opportunities and mentorship and sponsorship and flexible arrangements, role models. All of that is available. All of that is available. We just have to believe in making sure that moment can be seized. And I think that's how we are ultimately going to get the belief from the ecosystem, the belief from yourself, the support from everybody goes in making that happen.
Great. So I know that we have limitation of time, and I would request both of you to extend it a little bit, because things are getting a little hot up in the chat section. So Nisha Vithana, who's a cybersecurity enthusiast, wants to ask, as women leaders, what advice would you give for your younger selves? And how do you give back to the community? Who wants to take it?
Okay, so I'll go first then. So the two questions then, right? Saying what advice would I give to my younger self, and how do I give back to the community? Okay, so my advice to my younger self would be to trust. I didn't see the potential in myself for the longest time. For the first few years, I needed other people to tell me how good I am, or saying, oh, you could do this job and you should go for it. And hey, yes, you can do it, etc. So if I could go back and do it, I think it would be saying, you are as strong as you want to be. You are as powerful as you want to be. So don't wait for that. Don't wait for that confirmation. On the second question, for me, a lot of it is about spending time with, of course, the people. I do a bunch of things. I like to not talk about it. I think the one that I do want to talk about is creating a better world for children with disabilities. The pandemic is forced us all indoors, has sort of shown us what disability in a small, tiny sense could look like, right? We haven't had the chance to go out or travel or do things we wanted to. And there are 65 million children in India who live with disability as their life, right? So if I could, in my small contribution, do something small to make that life better for those people, I'd consider myself blessed. And that's where I actively participate in as a board member for that particular NGO. Outside mentorship, sponsorship conversations I advocate, the part of the reason I'm here is I want to make sure I'm advocating for more women in leadership, more women in sales, more women in technology, doing my tiny bit to help that make that happen.
No, indeed, it is very heartwarming and inspiring. Mahua?
Yeah. So if I would go back, and what I would say, work a little less. I mean, I think that whole striving for excelling, I have also, I would like to have more fun if I could get another chance, rather than for focusing myself on everything that I had. And I say the same thing to my daughter now, who's also an exact replica of me. So I know she's going to regret later, just like me. But she's an exact replica. Whatever she does, she has to do the best. So if I go back, I will probably have a little more fun. I work a little less. Now, how do I give back to the society? It is, see, I am someone who's very focused on the CSR in from anywhere, whichever company I'm in Mashreq, I'm very focused on the CSR, and our focus is on PWD, not so much the children, but more working professionals who are capable of working but have some disability. How can we bring more of them to the workforce? And also women. So as I mean, I think Shruti would know, I have always been a champion for women, not just in my company, but even otherwise, that why and how just more women should be taken in. And it's typically more than what I believe in. I believe in more encouraging more women to actually raise their hands than to someone else to, hey, hire more women, because I also believe that if women come in as a result of a checkbox or a number that HR drives, that's not going to do us any good. So what I do is I talk to ladies of all walks of life to actually make them raise their hands and come forward. So these are the two main things that I work on. And currently, in the current time, this pandemic has actually very badly impacted a lot of people. So that is one of the things that we have taken up, doing some psychosocial calls that we do, because many people are really suffering from psychological challenge, many kind of mental problem because of the pandemic, caused by the pandemic. So that is one of the initiatives that I drive now.
Okay, another question. Probably this is one of the last questions from the audience and the listeners. Anshuman Thakur wants to say that Rahul Neelmani, active women workforce in India has dropped below 15%. Active credit card users in India is less than 15%. What are the three most important war footing steps that we need to take to reverse the trend?
I think that's what we have been talking so far. See, other than from a social perspective, it is more, if it is like more, if we're focusing on women's education, that is there, that is happening. If it is more opening up more positions for women, that is also happening. It is, I think what is needed is to change the social mindset. Where there is a problem, it is all in the mindset. Now, can it be something, is it something that we can do in a war footing? I think not, because this is a society changes very, very slow, and it has changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years. It has a long way to go from there, more in some pockets than others, but then it is there. That's a big problem in India. But from a checkbox activity perspective, I think we are on the right track. I mean, I don't know, what do you think, Mankiran? I mean, are there really challenges that, okay, women cannot do this, besides the social norm, social pressure? And that, I don't know how to select that.
I think, Anshuman, I'll take a different angle to the question. You know, when Rahul and we were debriefing on the what sort of agenda, and he said, you know, I always ask the women, how do you balance work and life, right? So I think what we can fundamentally change is the parenting and balancing is not a motherhood job, right?
Absolutely.
And it's very much so. I think if the men, you know, I'm going to take a completely different angle, and I think the pandemic is really put a spotlight on it. I think if we don't take that advantage of that spotlight today, and we lose that gain that we've made during this pandemic of a more balanced house and everybody doing a little bit more than they were, whatever, you know, I've heard stories from, I have colleagues who say, I'm cleaning the bartan right now and, you know, taking this call, or that didn't happen before. But let's make sure that doesn't, you know, like that doesn't go back. That doesn't go back.
That should not change at all.
That should not change. And that's, I think, you know, how do we make it okay? I mean, I often get asked, how lucky are you? Your husband leans in for, you know, to help the children cycle or whatever. Like, just why am I lucky? Isn't that parenting? Isn't that everybody's job to do, you know, when everybody lives in the house? So I'm taking a different angle, Anshuman, and I'm not sure that's the question you asked, you know, but I think that's the opportunity. We have an opportunity that didn't exist before. I believe if we, you know, really take the advantage of this opportunity, we can make multiple gains on it, then and but I think that's also the cost, right? We have to make sure we don't regress into, it's all right for the men to come back at 9 o'clock and the food should be on the table, right?
I completely agree with you. I'm so happy and elated by these bold answers. And you are right. The pandemic was such a great leveler. One last question coming in from one of my friends, Meheryar. He wants to know, how are you implementing or observing diversity in your own organizations?
Okay. So Mankiran, why don't you go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think SAP is extremely open-minded, broad-minded with diversity, and whether it's, and I think diversity is a broad spectrum. It's diversity of gender, it's diversity of generation. We have a program called generational diversity. There's like I think Mawa spoke about. We have a program for SAP autism, within employed in SAP. So it's not gender. Gender is not just the defining, and I think it's a lot beyond diversity. It's to focus on that inclusive workspace. It's to focus on having that sense of belonging. It's LGBTQ. The diversity is a topic that, if you keep measuring just the number of women in leadership, that's one yardstick. But it has to go beyond what are the other aspects of making this a more inclusive work. So I always think of it as inclusion, not diversity. And I think SAP has got many public recognition, rewards around it as well. So we're not just saying it, we're walking the talk on it as well.
So in Mashreq, contrary to the popular belief that it's a Dubai-based organization, and even when I joined, I was, oh, you're joining a Dubai-based organization. It's a fabulously women-friendly organization. I've worked my first part of my career, I was in Canada. And then later on, I shifted to India, and I have worked in multiple organizations. There are very few which are as women-friendly. Our policies are extremely women-friendly. And when I say women-friendly, it's not just about, and I don't believe in keeping a number target and putting a checkbox. That's an HR target, which is also there. But what I'm saying is we need the policies that have been made are extremely women-friendly. The flexibility of work, even simple things like when you are pregnant, you are given a trolley laptop bag or a footrest. I mean, you can tell that there is a lot of care that is being taken, or you want a few hours break in between, you want to work flexible hours, all of that, besides students' academic allowance and all of. So basically, the company is very focused on very consciously focused on making it a very warm and nice workplace for women. So yes, of course, me being here, it helps because we probably notice things that, yeah, this is what is needed or that is what is needed. But overall, in general, the organization is very focused towards it.
Great. I think we have overshot our time limit with both of you by 2 minutes. But having said that, these are the conversations which actually demystify a lot of things, and also bring to the fore a lot of lessons, whether it is about empathy, whether it is about leadership. In today's conversation, a lot of it came out in terms of your personal CSR, your personal passions. And I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I mean, there are so many things that one would like to take away. And I can't tell you that there are so many compliments coming in from everyone who joined this conversation. You must read those comments, and I feel overwhelmed in your company. And thank you so much, both of you, Mankiran and Mahua, for your valuable time and very candid conversation, very, very candid inputs coming from heart. I mean, nothing was very cosmetic. I didn't find anything cosmetic in this conversation. So hats off to both of you. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And lovely meeting you, Mankiran.
Likewise, Mama. What an inspiration.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.